Hi everyone, thank you for joining our SARS group today. What we're discussing is racial esteem as it pertains to Blackness and our personal struggles or, journeys with racial esteem. And then also addressing the root of validating Africa. We can't be saying Black Lives Matter and there's Africa is nowhere in the conversation, because actually Africa is at the root of white supremacy and everything else that we're only discussing the symptoms of. So with that said, racial esteem is the confidence you have about being Black, for example, and maybe the first time that you noticed in school or in the workplace you were challenged with, your name or, the way you dressed or something, the way your parents spoke or, anything like that. So when did you come into contact with that? How have you handled it, and what has your journey been like?
Yeah, it was a difficult one. It was a struggle. I think, when was I first alerted to the fact that I was Black and it was a position of inferiority? I grew up on the fringes of East London, was in Essex, and I think I found out amongst Black people first. I grew up in a predominantly mixed environment.
Okay.
I think the older African kids that I were around, particularly Congolese, Jamaican and Ghanaian, were sort of funneling down the sort of words that are used for us. So that's when I was alerted to the fact that, there was a divide in that sense pretty young, primary school.
Was it a positive thing or a negative thing, or?
I think it was them regurgitating. I think a bit of both. Positive in the sense that that at least I was now informed. I knew what was coming.
Yeah.
But negative because obviously these words were said to them in not great terms either. So that's when I first got alerted to it. And it was a journey from there. And one thing I do love is that my parents always called us Africans, so we were Africans. They never used the term Black.
Yeah.
And we're specifically from Angola. Both my parents, I was born there as well. And it wasn't even we Angolan in a sense. The first thing I remember was being African.
Yeah.
Perhaps because we dotted around. We left Angola in like 89, my parents went to Brazil because in Portuguese speaking, thought that was not the best place to raise us. Portugal, neither, Spain, neither, stayed in France for a couple of years, then came here. So maybe it's just that unity of the continent that they weren't so we're Angolan, but it was more we're African.
Yeah.
Perhaps because of some of the places that they went to, they didn't give a damn where you're from, Nigeria,
right.
Ghana, Kenya, Angola, wherever. It was, you guys were African, you guys were Black. And that was a sort of unity in that sense. So it's been a journey of recognizing, who I am. And even now I'm struggling with the term, do I use Black or do I use African? I've written a children's book and we're going to self-publish. But when I was emailing publishers, I felt compelled to use the term Black British. I didn't want to use African. I didn't want them to think that we've just come straight over. We've been here for
mindset. You see, okay, so
kids have been here, we've got passports, the kids were born
that's what we're discussing, the hesitation.
So it's been, and even up to now, and I think there's been a confirmation bias. I think other SARS panels that we've had, I've said I'm going to use the term African.
Yep, you said it.
Because I was told that, but actually I was seeing 3 minutes is going, so I'll come back to it in just terms of different literature saying that actually even Africa is a colonial term, and that wasn't what it was always called. Black is not a political statement; it's actually always used for us. So I'm confused. I'm open to not make sort of quick judgment and be open.
So you're open to it. So obviously you're very in touch with your identity. Like you're Angolan, you're Black British or African British. However we want to identify, but I think it's just important that we equate. We give Africa its validity. Is that you wanted to oppress everything out of Africa. So us saying it actually reclaims that and forces the respect, because you've got, what you notice is that these people have no problem when we say in Africa in a negative sense, oh, that's in Africa, that's in Africa. But when we have to say it as a positive thing, we're like, oh, maybe, because we already know the common perception, right? When you fill out an application, for example, and you can tick African, or you could tick other, or you could just tick Black, British, or something like that. Is there like conscious changes or steps that you're making?
Yeah, I mean, with the applications thing, the only reason why I maybe put Black African is, I mean, Black British, sorry, is because I don't want them to think we're French. I don't want them to think I've just arrived
But
here.
why? But
I'm
why?
proud
That's
African.
what we need to discuss, because why is that
So
negative
sad. I
connotation?
know.
That
Isn't it
I could have
you?
just come over and I could be the smartest person in the UK.
And no one knows where the fudge I'm from because my name is very
Ambiguous.
ambiguous,
Yeah.
vague, and for them. But I just, so when I put Africa, I just don't want them to think I'm here. When they meet me, then I'm very proud. The girls know. The girls tell me all the time I want to go to Africa. I love the African dress. Mommy,
Yeah.
I'm very, we know
Yeah.
ourselves Black. But with the application things, again, it's just, I don't know why. I
It's
do
still
know
the
why.
mindset you're
I don't want them to think
processing.
I've just arrived and I'm not, I've not been, assimilated into this culture, and I don't know what for.
Yeah. But even that, because that's a conversation, that's one of the points I wrote down, that what we've been programmed now is to become the palatable Black, that they will accept. And a lot of these institutions, we want the palatable Black. We don't want the fresh. We don't want the this. We don't want the raw thing. We want the palatable. So even in some of these big companies or corporations, the Blacks that they let in are the passives, that they know, I'm letting you in, but I have nothing to worry about. Do you know? So it's something that, it's mindsets that we have to literally be pushing through.
Okay, so yeah, that just brought up a lot of thoughts for me. And I remember yesterday I was talking with my mum about this. What we weren't talking specifically about like African or Black identity, but it got woven into conversation.
Okay.
And she was talking about when she first came to this country, like 4 years in, there was an incident with a local terror kid, and
For the kid of terror.
yeah, he was. So he was throwing stones into the window, yeah, and trying to hit my older sisters. So then I think my dad went out and confronted the boy, African, got the switch and was gonna give it to you. And then mum came out and confronted, I think, the boy's mum and 2 of her friends, so 3 white women were now who she was confronting. And then a Black guy came who was a family friend of these 3 white women and pulled a knife on mum and was just like, oh, you effing African. And she was just like, yeah, I'm an African. And she said to him, what would make you want to do this to me when we are both African? And he was like, I'm not an effing African. And that's what prompted her to say the thing. And also the fact of the matter is he pulled it on her. Her husband, my dad, was standing there. So he could have confronted the man. He didn't, though.
Yeah.
That was just another layered thing. And then when they got to the police station, the police officer sort of doing like wings to sort of signal deportation. And she was just like, look at you, you're so unprofessional. Are you not here to do your job? And and the way that she responded to him, he was shocked that she wasn't more subservient.
The guy that pulled the knife.
No. So they took her to the police station, even though it was 3 women. She beat all the women up, which,
of course,
I mean, amazing. And then she was just like, how is it that 3 women can attack me? This one's pulled a knife on me, and you're saying that I'm the one that's being arrested for assault. So that's when at the police station, the officer was doing wings to signal deportation, and then she confronted him on how unprofessional that was. And then I was just like, where did you get all of this like confidence from? Because even like this is back in 1988, and the height, I mean, racism was
high back then, right?
And this is a woman who then later on, around that same time period, was working for the MOD. And when you're working in corporate spaces like that, and this is civil service sort of levels, to still hold that, and the fact that they were trying to recruit her, and she said no because I know who you would want me to be against. And I think it's that sort of prioritizing. It's the privilege of when you have a connection to Africa. So she even understands now, because she said she was able to have that sort of deep-rooted pride within herself because she hadn't been, the word that she used was groomed by this system yet to hate herself. And I think that is a thing when you have any sort of connection with Africa, that is a privilege that we need to recognize that we have, that other people might not feel as attached to. And I think for me, the first time I realized for myself that there was a self-esteem thing with being African was when I got into secondary school, and it was a pretty much an entirely almost all white secondary school. The only other black girl was directly from Nigeria and just sort of wanted to not be, I don't know what it was, but she just wanted to be on her own.
Okay.
And I came to school with thread, so the protective threading style, which was not weird because in primary school, which was a lot of black people in the primary school, it was not weird to have thread. And it was the sort of spectacle and the, oh, what's in your hair? And oh, it looks like Medusa. And I mean, from that day, never did any kind of, I had been natural for years, but I hadn't realized that that incident had made me really just like, be like, all right, thread is not for me, until I saw it in Lemonade with Beyonce. And I was just like, oh my God, like that feeling of, oh my God, it's on a worldwide platform, it's being given the beauty it deserves. And that's when I was just like, oh, there is a feeling where there's an uncomfortableness with showing just how African I am.
Yeah. One thing I wanted to add on with that, and again, the importance of why we have to bring it back to Africa is because the construct of black makes it seem as if we're still starting from slavery, and it gives a notion of how far we've come. And then also the state we're in right now, where everyone's like, oh, what do we do? What do we do? As if we're starting from scratch. However, we've had civilization. When we talk about re-educating ourselves and being knowledgeable out of Africa, we had stuff we do, even in terms of encouraging spending money and stuff. Susu, we have it. We have our collective spending habits. And also in the beauty field, because like you just said, when you saw something that's been done traditionally for years, decades, if not centuries, it's only when you saw it on a glamorized platform for under black, you felt validated. Meanwhile, African beauty still doesn't get credit for it being beautiful. People
I think
in Nigeria would still be like, oh, they still don't get no praise for it because now it's a black hairstyle. Do you get what I'm saying? When it's an African hairstyle. Well,
I think there's like, I agree with that, but I think there's like layers to it, because there are people who are, for me, when I've looked at the term black, there's the political side to it, of it being created for a specific reason. So there's the white context of black. Within the African diaspora, there's the fact that some people were violently removed from their African identity, and they have really struggled with how they were removed. So they've been fed lies with that, as well as some truth. And they feel a bit more alienated. So black is more of this umbrella term that connects us into all of these different spaces, which is how I've looked at it, which is why I put black before African. But African for me has always been where my pride comes from. You know, the fact that I know my tribes and I know where my family sort of their roots are, that's always been like my racial esteem, because you can't tell me, you know, lies. And I was, so one more thing is, for me, I wish that people would stop defining blackness within the context of like white oppression. So stop saying, oh, well, they see us all as N-words. That's not the point. That shouldn't be the definer of your identity, the fact that you're all oppressed, because there's like this longer history, this really beautiful history that your DNA plugs you into. And if you only want to start seeing yourself from the context of this period, is always going to be defined by struggle and you having to start again. And that's one thing that I've really noticed when it comes to any time that there's some sort of a movement that sort of starts up again. Everybody acts as if this is the first time. This is the first time that we... No. You are a continual progression in a long, long, long line. And it is important for everybody to know history, really. I think that's the most important subject that any African can learn, is history.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. John, do you want to say anything? You've been quiet for a minute.
Yeah. No, I've just been agreeing in my own space, but I never really experienced racism like head on. But I only heard about it from like my friends, etc. But I guess when I got into the secondary school like field, that was when like my blackness, if you will, was more evident. Obviously, you know how it is.
Was made apparent to you. Someone brought it to your attention.
Yeah, and obviously in a predominantly white school, my year had, when we came into year 7, we had the most black.
Oh, I think we lost him. Uh-oh. I think we lost him. Oh no. Oh, I'm just gonna go off. So hopefully he rejoins us. But yeah, a poignant point I must say. The reason why, like for John, Ellie, myself, we're all saying that we only got to experience racism or institutional racism or anything like that in secondary school is because when we were in primary school, we were shielded because we went to a predominantly black primary school that was set up, for our children, not just for blacks, but primarily because the British English education system wasn't doing enough. So we went to our parents' mainstream school, which they had set up from 1995 after the Saturday school. And that's why it afforded the protection for a lot of African and Caribbean students. So a lot of our stuff, being African and Caribbean was natural. Okay, John, you're back. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think in schools, we all know about, the way teachers like kind of pick on black students, if you will, certain black students, etc.
Yeah.
So I think that aspect was definitely evident. More to my end of my secondary school time, so like from year 9 to year 13, which is kind of weird because those are the years that count in terms of like progression to sixth form and university, etc. So I'll say those are my experiences, but outside of that, obviously secondary school as well, I started being introduced to the internet, social media, etc. So starting to be introduced into this global community of black people. And I'll say one thing that was definitely evident to me was the miseducation of African people in terms of their heritage. Obviously, I knew always that I was a Nigerian boy. Like that was just my thing. So like even throughout secondary school, I went around thinking every black person I saw was Nigerian. And then started being like Ghanaian. Like, that's just the way I was thinking. I was like, I'm Nigerian. In primary school as well, I never really met any other person that was from a different African country. I've never met Caribbeans or other Africans from different African countries that were as proud of their heritage as I was. So maybe that's why I didn't really,
it never came up,
them, and I didn't, I didn't acknowledge their heritage.
Yeah.
And I think that in a broader sense, taking myself out of the equation, in terms of the African community, I think in terms of colonization and slavery and dividing us, I'll say that they were, and by they I mean like white people, etc. They were successful in creating that divide because it was almost a sin to say that Jamaicans were Africans.
Yeah.
Like, my God, you could almost get beaten up.
They would fight. You would be getting ready to fight.
Like it will almost be like as if you're blaspheming against God.
Yeah.
Like it was so bad, and I would be thinking, you guys, because at that time I hadn't learned about history, etc. Like this was like maybe between year 9 and year 11. Because I did geography for GCSE, so I wasn't learning about history, etc. And I'll just be thinking, okay, you Jamaicans, you're also black. Africans are black. In America, from what I learned, the Americans were home to native Indians.
Yeah.
So you guys didn't just pop out of nowhere. So at that time, I didn't know where Jamaicans had come from.
Had that question.
So then I was just thinking, like those questions were just like running in my head. So I was now thinking, you guys, you're like us, Like, what's gone on in your own history that's caused
Yeah.
this divide and this like hate? Like, it was a deep,
It's been a
deep founded hate
right.
within them as a community. It wasn't just like one or few of them. Any Jamaican that you
Yeah.
say, oh, you are from, you know, you're originally African, they'll be like, no, almost as like they're denying their history. So
Yeah.
I'll say in terms of moving forward now, that has to be, and I think now they're more supportive of that notion, but we need to completely break down that barrier of them thinking, oh, we're our own separate person. Because one thing with the Black community that I've noticed, and the African community, is that we are a force when we're together, like an immovable force. Like, it's ridiculous how much power we have when we're one. Like, just look at the president water that I've gone in America. It literally started like almost like a wildfire, and it spread across the globe, and we were, you know, brought together. So imagine if we, as the African continent, we can do that with all the people in the diaspora as well. We can bring our pool our resources together. The change that we can implement on this world would actually be groundbreaking. Literally.
Yeah. Definitely, because we've all gone through some level of programming, Africans at home and in the diaspora, because even the self-hate you see in Africa, that they want to be anywhere else other than Africa. Some of them are envious that they weren't born in the diaspora, you know, but because also we're not giving that credence back and validating them. You understand? So we have to do that.
So just touching on that point about the ways in which we're sort of severed from our African identity, one of the best ways that looking at how the States, or let's just say the West, does this is through this thing called soft power. So if I can just read the definition. So soft power contrasts with hard power. So hard power is like the use of force, military. Soft power is the ability to affect the behavior of others by influencing their preferences, affect the behavior of others by changing their circumstances. So one of the ways that America, for example, is really good at this is with Hollywood and any sort of programming, and not just Hollywood, but Britain as well. So if you look at the ways that Black people in the UK have identified, when Caribbeans first came here, they just wanted to be British. Like, don't call me anything other than British, because they felt like they were children of the Commonwealth, you know, all of that. They're children of England. That's what they were sold. And then when Africans came, you saw that a lot of first, second generation wanted to be called Jamaican, not African, because Jamaicans by that point had been accepted. And a lot of it comes down to what you see in aid adverts. So the number one thing that people think about when they think about Africa is the aid adverts, you know, the hungry children, the starving Somalian, the starving Kenyan, or some sort of war. And by making you feel like you want to run away from that image, whether it is mentally, physically, in any kind of way, they've already won, because they want you to run away from Africa, because the main thing that they want with Africa is the resources and the land. So whichever way you don't feel like going back to this place, you don't want to identify with this place. And I remember, even for myself, the first time I went back to Nigeria, when I was like 12, and understand, I'd been in primary school that was pretty much entirely Nigerian. It was run by Africans and everything. And my perception of Nigeria was still like, oh, it's going to be like dirt roads and there's going to be elephants. That was literally in my mind. And I said it to my dad, and he was just like, what? And I was just like, I don't know where I got that image from, but that's
the theme. Because if one of your friends at school had asked you, what is Africa like, you would have been like, I don't know, elephants and dirt roads, you know. So,
and I think it also comes from, even when we look at the positive pictures of Africa, it's always animals. It's always the safari somewhere, and those things are a lot ingrained in why people run away. And even when we look at the language around how people sort of define within our communities, and we say like, our village boy, village girl. The village is like I mean, it's got the best land, it's got the best soil, it's got the best everything. That's where you should be really running to. But it's the way that they sort of get you to push yourself out of these spaces. And it's strategy, and it's very
They get us
masterful.
to disassociate from our heritage, and because when we disassociate, it's free for anybody, you know. And also, we are free to be told whatever nonsense that they want to tell us. So,
well, they can keep moving the goalpost.
Yeah, exactly. And that disassociation is how they infiltrate is through the passive blacks. And that's how they water it. They, first of all, they traumatize it into us. That's what they did. Traumatize it and make us. Sorry. They've traumatized this disassociation into us, and I wrote this down, making us distance ourselves and disassociate from our traditional clothing is something that you don't wear, you don't feel normal in. How many times that, even when I wore trad, even growing up in the church, it'll be something you wear on Sundays, you know? You can be your African self on Sunday. And then there was one time where I like, for example, agbada, I feel it's really freeing, like it's just comfortable, better than like top and jeans or something like that. So I wore it one time, and there was I had the same comment by two different people, by an African man and a white woman. And she was just like, oh, I love your costume. It's not Sunday. And I was like, it's not Sunday. I'm African every day. Like, what do you mean? This is what I would wear. If I was in Nigeria, I would wear this every day. Why is it that, because I'm over here, my culture only gets relegated to Sunday? So that's one thing in terms of our traditional clothing, our intellect. They make it seem like disassociate yourself. It's only 419 that they do. Or, you know, those Africans, 419 or Nigerians or whatever, our names, distancing ourselves from that, making it seem, and our parents making them seem like everything has to be more passive and palatable. Our languages, even our songs, you know, everything.
Touch on what you were talking about in terms of like the African culture aspect. I feel that, and this goes back to American Black culture. And the reason why I say that is because, as you know, as much as we may like or not like it, Black American culture is extremely influential on the rest of the world. As in, like literally, it's almost gotten to a point where what they say is like the new trend, if you will.
Law, yeah.
Yeah, and I feel that because of the miseducation of Africans and the lack of education of African culture, it was definitely made a mockery of. As in, if you look back to all the old American movies, even recently, it's not even old, old to recent portrayals of Africans within the American Black community, they have been very mediocre, for one. They've been very, they've been made a mockery of in terms of African culture. And it's almost as if, like, they're completely disassociated from Africans. Like, if you look at all of their, like, in the comedic aspect, look at all their comedy sets talking about Africa or whatnot. First of all, they just class Africa as one big country, which is extremely annoying, and the brushing under of different African countries and just calling it Africa. Like when these American celebrities say, "Oh, I went to Africa," I'm like, your plane didn't land in one random spot.
Right.
It went to an airport and it landed in a country. It's not that hard to specify which country. I don't just say, "Oh, I went to USA." No, I went to Texas in America. Or I went to Washington D.C. I would specify where I went to in a continent. Like, they think the same way of Africa that the white slave masters and the white people that are racist do. So it's a thing where that whole notion of, oh yeah, Africa's just one big jungle, that, oh, I don't want to go there. It's like, mate, that's where you come from. And my thing is, even if you don't like the images that are being portrayed of Africa, because most houses in Africa, if you have the money, they're no smaller than like a mansion that you would get in Texas. Like, you have these things in Africa. And the UK Diaspora, one thing that I really congratulate us for is bringing the world to the knowledge that, no, Africa is not just a dumping ground. It's not just a pile of crap. Do you know what I mean? As American Black culture, they are they're the trendsetters, if you will, as of right now. And I feel that once because if it was in 2016 or 2017 when all these celebrities were going to Ghana for December, and I was really happy to see that, because it put Ghana and through that put Africa on the map, telling people that this place is a beautiful country that you can come and have a good time, and it's not this rubbish that has been portrayed for so many decades. Do you know what I mean? So I think that once as educated, if you will, as maybe the UK diaspora or Africans, individual countries back home, I feel that would then help to bridge this gap between the term of being black, which I know has no country of origin, and the African community as a whole. So,
Right.
that was my last point.
Exactly. Sorry, in terms of saying Black Americans lead and are the trendsetters, yeah, but this is the construct, because what is so great about the Blacks over there is only because they have the westernized cosign, right? And that's why they even operate with American privilege, because they then shit on Africans. You understand? It's Africans, but with Western privilege. So that's why, they're the trendsetters and not you guys, because you guys come directly from them. We don't want that. We want the people that look like you, but with our minds. And like you said, Black people with white supremacist minds.
All right. So I think the thing that's important to remember is imperialism. That's the number one, because when we're trying to, even when we've said that we want to put Black and then British, it's because there's no way that we can take off the Black, because it's all over us, so we can't actually take that part off, so we have to acknowledge it. But the next best thing you can do is acknowledge your imperialist country first, before the African, which is why every single person who exists, whether you're second generation, first generation, or whatever, always highlights the imperialist country. And whatever imperialist country you are in influences how you act as a black person. African Americans are imperialist in the way that America is imperialist, so they think that their culture is supreme. They think that their culture is it, and because America defines itself in very, very ignorant terms, because they act as if they are on their own in the world, leading everything. And part of the reason why African American culture, and I'm not this is not to say that it is all bad, some of the best things that we have in this world have come from their culture, and it is partly a culture of that's deep rooted in survival. But an issue with that is African American culture does start from slavery and is a response, both in survival and just a response to white oppression. So it is always influenced by like this sort of plantation mentality. And where you see the best of them break away from that is when they truly connect with the African identity. And I think that's when all of us truly get our best selves, is when we deeply connect with our true African identity. But America uses African American culture around the world as a tool to sort of say, they use it, like the cool aspect, all of that, they use it around the world, but they control it. So they will put it around the world. But for example, when we saw the image of, what's his name, the little guy, Kevin Hart, braiding, cornrowing, what's his name?
Will Ferrell's hair.
Yes, the other white comedian's hair, and that image went all over the world. Now for Kevin Hart, he might think, oh my God, my image has gone global, but attached to that was a message and an image, and it reinforced a stereotype. So even when we look at, like, Coming to America is one of my favorite movies, but but at the same time, in it is layered with so many just...
Not that I loved it too, but it is so clever.
Yeah, reinforced a stereotype. So even when we look at, like, Coming to America is one of my favorite movies, but but at the same time, in it is layered with so many just...
Not that I loved it too, but it is so clever.
Yeah.
It is.
Whenever African Americans sort of, in film anyway, try and speak to their African identity. I think Black Panther was better, but it's always done in this sort of fantastical, okay, we can pick from elements and things like that, but it's almost done in this sort of like it's a fantasy land. And for me, that just comes from the fact that when you look at America as a whole, geography is not their top subject. Even when you look at how they sort of construct their maps, they put themselves at the center, which is just not, it's just not correct in any sense. But that is the thing, that every Black person is impacted by their imperialist country. And if you keep trying to sort of do what appeases your imperialist country, you're always going to end up shitting on Africa, basically, because that's what you have to do, because that's what your country does.
Exactly.
Yeah, I was going to say as well, touching on the whole education, the education system in America is just one disaster after another, to be honest. The 3 times that I've gone there, I've been asked 3 times if we speak French in England, so that's just problematic in and of itself. But yeah, I agree with what Ellie's saying. Their history starts on slavery, so it's starting from their starting point is struggle, is pain, is survival. Whereas ours is not. Ours is one, the African who can trace back. I'm from here, this tribe, this land. Is not. It was birthed in. It was regal. It was regal. I mean, we've got Queen Zinga, and she was a good woman. Like, she was the baddest. She put the Portuguese in the place. Was a great negotiator and was on the front line. Back, not like these leaders now who are in suits and they get everyone to date. Back then, when you were a leader, you were at the forefront. But yeah, so the American, the Black Americans, yeah, their start is not a great one. So I almost don't blame them for wanting them to try and retell their narrative and turn it on its head and make someone else below them, because they were bottom of the barrel for so long, still are, and unfortunately. But I would say this, I think with Africa, yes, there's been a ploy to try and, it's like a psyops, to really just try and make us feel down about ourselves and infighting. So I disagree a bit with a point I was made earlier in terms of, it's the white people that, are trying to get us. They're leaving us to it, to be honest, because they want us to have the infighting so they can come out of it. I saw a meme that my friend put on Instagram, and it was two slaves on the ship. And one slave went to the other, "Oh, bruh, my chain is shinier than yours." Another one goes, "Wow, we're on the same slave ship." They just let us pick at little things to make us sort of trample each other and get one over each other. And that's what's happened with the American Blacks, the Caribbean Blacks, and us Africans. Unfortunately, they've just left us to it. And I think we need to work on that, because together the racial esteem will grow better, as we see what the numbers are doing when we come together. The power that we can achieve, as opposed to these little nuances. I mean, I'm from Angola. I think JJ touched upon it. I couldn't say I was from Angola, even if I wanted to, because no other African knew where the fudge I was from.
Yeah, no.
They were saying Mongolia.
Right.
They didn't know Wag. I said the Congolese, because we have a border and stuff, and I didn't mean no Botswana and Namibia. There's another borders, but the Congolese, they knew who the hell we were, because a lot of them were coming through Angola to get to here. But you West Africans weren't aware of us.
You weren't on our
So
radar.
we need to also educate ourselves. I got a map of Africa for the girls, a book of Africa. I'm like, you guys are Nigerian, you're Angolans, their father's Nigerian, but it's also this, that, and the other. As an education needs to come within us that I can trace back to tribes and countries, because what y'all did to me weren't cool, man.
we're gonna come to that.
So I was Portuguese.
Oh, okay.
I was Portuguese, because y'all knew where Portugal was. So I was Portuguese. I was, when we got Cristiano Ronaldo. And so one was talking about how the treatment of Angolans in Portugal, I was like, Lord, who am I? Who did this? Who the hell am I, Lord?
Yeah.
There's a lot of identity issues, but education within our continent. Just building each other up. And then look, the Caribbeans eventually came on. They're the ones selling all the African related stuff more than us. They're on it now. So they eventually, we eventually won.
Well,
In school, it was the A team against the
of,
C team, African team against the Caribbean team. And I said, we eventually won because you are us. We all won anyway.
exactly.
You guys,
It's the journey of self at the end of the day.
So
You're knowing who you are.
they're so proud to be. They're from Africa. I mean, if you read Akala's Natives and him, you know, teaching his grandma, that mum, black grandma, you know, Jamaica's worse in terms of violence and stuff in Africa. Just all these things, all these misconceptions. And again, programming, soft power programming,
exactly.
to get us to infighting. So yeah,
definitely. Just on your point that yes, there's a lot of internal work to be done, but what we have to realize is that we're fighting so many wars because we got the white people that are the white supremacy that's not going nowhere. That's a war we've got to fight. You understand? But we also need our communities and each other to understand that we make it easier for them by a lot of the stuff we do within our community to each other. You know, because even if if you take a house now and there's a family in the house and they're all fighting in that house, but the front door is closed, a robber isn't coming in to get in the middle of that to add to that fight. But if the door is open, they're fighting and somebody can come in and join that, and then everything's for grabs, you know. So I wanted to say about when we say that African American, because my thing is racial esteem runs so deep in terms of some of the terms that we still use, and there's still that derogatory kind of shame attached to being like African Americans started from slaves. No, they were African people that were enslaved. That's how I think it should be said, because they always start as if, oh yeah, we were African slaves and then we came to America and became great. No, we were great Africans. You know what I mean? Like, we need to put that in cement. Like, you were African people, because even, for example, the statue of I forgot his name, Bencos Buehio, I'm not sure I said it right, in Colombia. He was a prince in a royal family taken from Guinea-Bissau. But an African American or a black Mexican could be like, oh yeah, he was our ancestor was a slave. No, he was a prince, you know. So it's better for them to say we are that African Americans are African people that were enslaved and taken to America, rather than, oh, you were slaves. You know?
Just touching on Pelena's point about being from Angola and not having the courage to say it.
Yeah.
I'll say that, yeah, that's definitely an internal problem. I'll say, yeah, definitely that's an internal problem where obviously, and I use myself as an example. Obviously, I was Nigerian. As Nigerian people, we're very proudful. That's, you know, it's a blessing and a curse. And I think that in that, it can be very intimidating for other African countries. For example, in my secondary school, in my year, there were many black people in my year, as I said, but there were only, I think, 2 Ghanaian boys from year 7 to year 11. And obviously, growing up in South London as well, Southeast London, that's predominantly a Nigerian area. You would rarely run into a Ghanaian anyway. So having that, and then when I now got to uni, there was just an influx of Ghanaian people. So I was like, oh, bro, there's a lot of you.
Yeah.
So when I found out, I was like, oh, wow, okay, yeah, let's get a party moving. But yeah, it's a thing where we have to, as much as we say that I'm here to be educated, we ourselves have to educate ourselves, not on just our own direct country's history, but also in other African countries' history as well. Like me myself, I'm going to take it upon myself now to really delve into African history, everything, the good, the bad, the ugly, everything, because you can't move forward as a people if you don't know your ancestors, their great, their worst,
and
things that they could have done better, things that they didn't do it at all, literally. So that I'm taking it upon myself now to really research into that. But I've always loved history. I was kind of, you know, I didn't get to do it for GCSE, which was annoying because I really wanted to, but that's definitely something that I'm taking upon myself now. And as a diaspora, we have to do that as well. My next point, I think it was either Ellie or Debbie that said it, in terms of Black Panther. Now, that movie, there's a saying that comes with it on Twitter, where it's like, oh, they should have never given you niggas Black Panther, because as Devin said, it's as if they're more proudful of Wakanda than that for Africa that it was made, you know, from, or that it was, or the blueprint that it was made from. Like they haven't really gotten the grasp of, you know, the fact that Wakanda is not real and it's a representation, a fictional representation of a real, of what Africa should be, sorry, or what of a real place. And that one is just it's just amazing, because as good as Black Panther was in terms of representation of Black actors and, you know, African heritage, I feel that a lot of Black Americans completely missed the point of that movie. And it should have been a wake-up call that, yo, you guys, look at, even though it's fictional, look at what we could achieve if, you know, we actually put ourselves together and we actually work together. It should have been like a wake-up call, not a moment in history, you know, where we have Black actors on screen. Another big thing about education in America, that one, so I think there needs to be a reform or reformation of their education system on the most basic level, because if you're confused about landmarks, for God's sake, like put less of history, you know what I mean? The centering of USA on world maps.
Jane Elliott.
Yeah, she did a video quite recently showing the different world maps, and the original one where I forgot who made it, but they put USA in the center. As they put USA in the middle, it changed the size. They changed the sizes of other continents.
Yeah,
and that is a big, because this is why I say that this whole issue of racism, it goes so deep, because if you can change the image of a geographical landmass, you know what it means to change this fight against racism, etc. I think that if people didn't know already, now they need to know that it's not just a group of people we're fighting. We're actually fighting a system that runs millennia deep. Like it hasn't just come about within the last 50 years. It hasn't come about within the last century. It hasn't come about within the last couple of centuries. It goes millennia deep. Like this is over thousands of years that we're trying to uproot this system and literally dash it in the bin. So the only way you can fight a system is either from within the system or with a whole other system. Literally, African history doesn't start from slavery. Look at what the Egyptians have done. Look at the pyramids. The pyramids are so mind-boggling, so majestically and so beautifully in a time where it couldn't have even been imagined, that people actually think, like there's conspiracy theories and people actually believe that aliens came down and made those buildings. So if you look at our own intellect, our own historical greatness, like that is the system we need to revert to, and only that system can fight and uproot this system that we're trying to fight now. Because this notion of we need to get into the system, it's all well and good, but this system is so much bigger than any one of us. We need a whole other system to literally fight and break down what this current system of white supremacy and racism, you know, that has been built up.
On John's point about the system that needs to be the systems that need to change and need to be. So number one, white supremacists, like white people have their job to do. Dismantle the system that you created. That's your job. Go over there and do that. Educate your offspring, educate your elders, educate everybody like that. You got enough work to do. And then on our side, the new system that comes up, I think it needs to be a system that it is for African people in the continent and in the diaspora, because we need that chain of validation and Africans standing for each other on the continent and outside the continent, because the world is up in arms for African American because they're African American. But how many times do we see that reciprocated between each other? Do we have African Americans rising up for Africans, and that be whatever African country you want? Do they rise up for African Brits? Do they rise up for Afro-Italians? You know?
So that segues almost sort of perfectly into what I was wanting to say. So I'm pretty sure everybody knows about Toyin that was murdered in this last sort of few days. And one of the most disturbing things I saw was a comment that said, that is a foreign black issue. This is a black woman who's Nigerian, but she's African American. And just by the fact that she has, and through her name and through her heritage, she is Nigerian. Somebody said that it is a foreign black issue, as in it is not our issue.
Wow.
And then we can get into the layers in which her being a black woman, people have like further disassociated themselves from making this an issue that they need to speak on. But it was the fact that the word foreign was used when they can see that around the world, foreign blacks have taken up for you in ways that you wouldn't have any change if it wasn't for the fact that this thing was so global, let's be honest. And that ties into something that I said on the last SARS panel, where it is really important that people understand the globalness of the black movement. But I think it's also not calling it the black movement, because most of the people who were global in their thinking and global in their movements were Pan-Africans. They were Pan-Africans, and they said it. So I think we need to stop. I think I need to even myself stop saying the black movement. They were Pan-Africans, and they were always the ones that got killed. As soon as any African American began to tweak that there is a globalness to this, and that there is a way that they need to network around the world, whether it's within the UK blacks, the African blacks, the Caribbean blacks, the South American, the wherever they went. Once they keyed into that, they were suddenly too big a threat, and they were always assassinated. I think there's also something that needs to be said about the way that the structure of race mimics class. So that the reason why anybody always sort of punches down is because when you look at the system of class, that you are always encouraged to punch down and make yourself feel better for the fact that you will not be allowed to progress in the system, but you're still better than A, B, and C, which is why it's always so key that within the UK, for white people, they have things like Red Nose Day and that bear with the eye patch, whatever the hell it's called. Children in Need, thank you. They always have to have that, because it's to remind you that no matter how bad you have it, somebody else has it worse, and it's to encourage you to stay within that system, because you could be the person that has it worse if you don't stick within this. I think another thing to be said is when people say pyramids, so John said the pyramids, a lot of people don't know that there are pyramids in Sudan.
Sudan, yeah.
The kingdom of Kemet, Kush, whatever you want to call it, it extended past Egypt. And I think the reason why a lot of people want to keep the thinking of pyramids and stuff to Egypt is because they can limit it to Northern Africa and not include sub-Saharan Africa.
Yeah.
And even that whole thing of sub-Saharan Africa, all Africa is Africa, right? You have invaders who have now occupied Egypt, and that's the reason why they don't take care of the pyramids, and they don't mind people coming and excavating and walking up things, because they wouldn't allow that on their own monuments. So that's how you know that the people that are occupying that land are not the people that built those pyramids. I think another thing to say is chaos theory, right, as well. That comes into it, of making people feel like you have to have this sort of crabs in a barrel, you know, sort of, oh no, I'm not too African. I'm not too African for you to accept me. And also the TV and the African identity, they go hand in hand. So a lot of people, the only time, sorry, the sun is blinding me, the only time that they are really willing to, and I said it myself when I said the Beyonce thing, the only time we're really, really willing to accept part of our African identity is when it suddenly becomes palatable on the mainstream stage. And it just shows you how, I'm RuPaul's Drag Race. It was really important something that happened last week. One of the contestants wore a really tiny afro, and it was like, love the skin you're in, so came in like a bejeweled costume. But the most important thing was that tiny afro. And I just realized when I saw that, I was just like, that afro has never been shown in a glamorous context. That length of our hair, when it's just small afro, not a big poofy one like Pam Grier, a tiny afro that's close cropped to the head. And I was like, that is the power of art and entertainment, is when it's not that those things are not on an elevated standard, but it's because we get so much negative stereotypes about ourselves. When you even look at anytime they're depicting a sort of a mammy character or somebody who's undesirable, they darken the skin, the eyes are always brown, the hair is always super nappy, and they make you, they're passing on a message that says that to be African and to be phenotypically African is to be less than, is to be ugly, is to be worth less. So you run away from those images more. So when they are, I think that's the importance of TV and showing you that you are beautiful and all those things. So that's where I praise films like Black Panther, because they did do their research. And the last thing I will say is the intellect. So like, I think it's happened like 3 or 4 times now. I've been speaking to somebody about some work I've been doing, and they're like, oh, so articulate, or oh, you're really eloquent. And it's the surprise and the sort of that sort of inflection. And I'm like, I'm on a program that only 18 people got onto in this country. What makes you think I'm not like, that shouldn't be a surprise. It would be surprising if I was not articulate. You know what I mean? It would be a surprise if I wasn't. And even my mum said the exact same thing happened to her, where when she was working in the MOD, they would be like, oh, where did you study? And she was like, in Nigeria. And they were like, really? She was like, yes, I did. And it's because she said that the school that she went to in Nigeria, they were teaching the children to the colonial level of English and things, because that was the standard. And I said, didn't they account for like the way that they teach education in this country in terms of class, and they stagger it, they don't do it equally? And she was like, no, it was a standard. We had high aspirations and things. So she hadn't been sort of inculcated with that sort of mentality that Black people are less intelligent, they can't learn as much, they have learning disabilities and all of those things. And I think that is part of this whole conversation, is how many of these messages we are fed continuously from a really, really young age, all throughout our lives.
Yeah, definitely. Even to the way we have, as Black people, the way we survive and are able to move on is we mask our trauma in our comedy and in our songs and in our, in our dances or whatever we want to do. And sometimes the wrong that we do ends up enforcing these negative programming, because like for example, the comedies, you would get brownie points with the whites and other people of color for mocking your people. For the more you can mock your people, the most degrading comedy, the more you're able to degrade them, the more we'll praise you and put you on the big screen. And then we started doing that in the community as well. And then it was just like everyone's game, and it's just, oh, you have to have a tough skin. And it's like, no, some of these things, it's real, because comedy is not just for joke. There's a quote that says there's truth in jest, because some of these people, even though they're saying certain things for comedy's sake, those are really internalized problematic stuff, which is why the world had to stand up and start saying rape jokes are not funny, because when everyone's thinking and laughing about this and it's something we laugh about, there's so much stuff that is passive now.
That I forgot to make on the other one was the issue of tribalism. And that is something where that needs to be tackled so deeply, because at the moment, there's, for example, in Nigeria, where they're going through the whole northern and southern divide, and how the north is trying to land grab from the south and all of these things. And again, it all has roots back to colonialism, and I think that is the most important thing for mainland Africans to deal with. But the point of the matter is, again, not acting as if we're starting from scratch. There were multiple politicians. So my mum was telling me about one, and I just want to mention his name. Obafemi Awolowo. So he is definitely somebody that everybody needs to know about, because he was a socialist, he was a Pan-African, and he really took Nigeria forward. Like, he introduced really excellent education, healthcare, and all of those things in his part of Nigeria when you still had like Nigeria segmented. So there are multiple politicians and leaders who were moving Africa as a whole in a really good direction if you look between like the 70s and 80s and even the late 60s. And a lot of their names have really been erased from our consciousness. And we are, in the diaspora, are really not aware of the tribal issues that go on inter-country, because a lot of Nigerians do not look at themselves as Nigerians. They look at themselves as tribe first, because Nigeria is an identity that was placed upon them by a foreign power. So there's that too.